IIT Raipur. We are fortunate to have two eminent speakers today to speak on epilepsies in pediatric population. I welcome Dr. Shekhar Patil sir and Dr. Mahesh Sambhare sir. These two don't need any introduction, but just as a formality, I would like to tell a few words about both of them. Dr. Shekhar Patil sir has done MD Pediatrics and DM and DMD in Neurology. He is a fellow of in pediatric neurology and has done fellowship from London. And now he is working as a consultant in neurology at Apollo Hospital. Dr. Mahesh Sambhare sir has done fellowship in pediatric neurology between 2009 to 2011, and currently he is working as a pediatric consultant pediatric neurologist at Vijayawada Hospital in Mumbai, Fortis Hospital, Sankalp Child Neurology Center, Panvel, and also he is visiting as a pediatric neurologist at various places in the district.
Your Coke,
I welcome them.
protecting the brands.
Now I request Dr. Mahesh Sambhare sir to start with the discussion about epilepsy cases in pediatric population. I request sir to begin with your presentation.
Thanks, Manju madam. Okay. Is it visible now?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, Mahesh.
Yeah.
Yes, Mahesh, sir.
Am I
Yes.
audible now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So good evening all. First of all, thanks Raigad IP for giving me this opportunity. And second, I'm really gladful to be a part of this CME. So let's start with the first topic of today's discussion. It's first unprovoked seizure. The today's discussion will not be as a topic wise, but rather we will try to give up few of the take-home messages, a couple of take-home messages that you can practice in your daily pediatrics. So let's start with the first unprovoked seizure or first episodic event. So let's start with a case. 5-year-old boy, non-consensuous marriage, developmentally normal, had one episodic event that was noted by parents in sleep. He had dreamed in sleep and was eating and chewing something in the dream. This is what that was explained by the parents. But on detailing, what we got is parents got up from the sleep because of the gurgling sound and with lots of saliva that soaking pillow. There was deviation of face towards right with chewing like movement, which parents recognized. And during this period, he was unresponsive with blank stare. This period lasted for some 5 minutes and back to normal. Rest neurologically normal, no significant neurocutaneous marker, no motor deficit, basal metabolic workup was normal. So at this point, what we have is just a single episodic event that happened in sleep. So let's see how to approach this. So we have a paroxysmal event that happened in sleep, which may be epileptiform or which may very well be non-epileptiform. There are certain seizures which characteristically occur in sleep. Of this, the predominant or the first that comes, it's Beck's or Rolandic seizures. These are nocturnal seizures. These are infrequent seizures. These are brief seizures. They are predominantly affecting perioral area. So you have this chewing movement, you have swallowing like movement, you have lots of salivation, but less frothing. This is exactly what we have in our patient. The second thing is nocturnal frontal lobe epilepsy. The frontal lobe seizures are hypermotor seizures. Here the patient gets up from sleep with screaming, thrashing, unconsolable, stays in that phase for a minute or two and goes back to sleep. These are frontal lobe seizures or hypermotor seizures. Third is JTC in juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. JME, we all know, have characteristically high myoclonic jerks in the morning. But along with this, they have GTCs These GTCs are particularly in the early mornings, between 4-5 to 6-7 o'clock in the morning. So these are classical GTCs that occur in juvenile myoclonic epilepsies in adolescent age group. And second, last one is symptomatic epilepsy or LGS. They have tonic spasms. What they get? These are delayed kids, spastic kids, and they have super refractory seizures. They have seizures commonly in the sleep. These are tonic spasms. There are certain non-epileptiform events which also occur in sleep. Parasomnias like confusional arousals, sleepwalking, sleep terrors. These arousals are very well may simulate the frontal lobe seizures, what we have seen before, or obstructive sleep apneas, where the patient gets up with choking like episode, maybe sweating. In these, always ask for snoring, ask for sleeping with open mouth. So now, how to differentiate between two? The only objective way to differentiate between these two is to get an EEG. You may have a positive EEG, as in this case. In this case, what we can see here is this odd one are left side, even are right side. On left side, you have a prominent spikes which are there over central area, which are there over temporal area. Similarly, this way. This is next page, where also you can see very prominent spike and wave activity over left centrotemporal region. And this is the sleep record. Now, of same patient, this is the awake record. And this awake record is absolutely normal. So first take home point at this point, if you have a seizure in sleep or any type of, particularly ask for sleep EEG record. In this case, if you have done just an awake record, there is every chance that you will get a awake record which is normal. So when you have a seizure, particularly in sleep, always ask for sleep EEG or at least sleep deprived EEG, where you can get the abnormality very well. So was really indicated EEG? Yes. EEG is the only objective investigation where you can diagnose epilepsy. So EEG, it may be show epileptiform activity or it may not. Even in a proper epileptic patient, there is fair chance that you make it a normal EEG record. But if you get an abnormal EEG record, you can differentiate lots of things, whether it's generalized one, whether it's focal one, whether it's GTC. In GTC, what you get on EEG is generalized spike and wave activity. In absence, you classical get generalized 3 Hertz burst, which is very classical of absence. In myoclonics, you get polyspike wave burst. So from EEG, you can retrospectively diagnose the type of seizure the patient may have got. If you have an abnormality which is focal, it will help in localization. As in this case, we have epileptiform discharges over centrotemporal area. And second is lateralization, where it is on left. And also, very importantly, a well-read EEG, you can diagnose can give just single EEG can give a syndromic diagnosis. And once you get the syndromic diagnosis, you can predict practically everything regarding that epilepsy. So believe me, a well-read EEG and technically sound EEG is just priceless. So let's move on. The second most important question is, what's the best time to do EEG after seizure? Can anyone tell what's the best time?
After 3-4 days.
Okay, first, second. Some say after 48 hours, some say after 7 days, after 3-4 days.
After 72 hours is okay. After 72 hours.
Within first 24 hours or every 6 hours.
Ideally.
So the best chance of getting abnormality is within the first 24 hours. And that goes off gradually over a period of time. Initially, we used to say to wait for 48 hours, 72 hours, because you get slowing. Again, the slowing to some extent may help us because that indicates the locus. Second, a day or two, you have a period of hyperexcitability. So many times you get that epileptiform discharges immediately after the seizure. So the best period of getting done the EEG after seizure is 24 hours or anywhere during the, so early the EEG, better is the yield. So to summarize, we have a child which has a single episodic event, very likely to be seizure in a developmentally normal child with a focal epileptiform discharges, which is localizing to left centrotemporal region. In view of focal discharges, the MRI was done, that was normal. So the probable diagnosis is with, in view of semiology that we have with facial involvement, with excess of salivation, with centrotemporal spike and normal MRI, the diagnosis is Rolandic seizure or Beck's, which is extremely common. Nearly 58% of the total benign epilepsy syndromes in childhood or are all Beck's. Now, second question, whether MRI is really indicated here. So this is the article that clearly states that the prevalence of neuroimaging abnormality in children presenting with the first unprovoked seizure is high in India due to high prevalence of NCC or tuberculosis. One thing just I want to add here, there are many cases where we get a subtle perinatal changes, minor occipital scarring, minor other scarring without NICU stay, with a normal birth, but still you get a predominant scarring, and this can also be missed because that is very important prognostically. So imaging, if it is unprovoked seizure, unprovoked complex focal seizure, definitely indicated. So here, as it was a complex focal seizure, started on oxcarbazepine and midazolam spray was given. Now again, the question arises whether to start on antiepileptic or not to start on antiepileptic. Over a period of time, what I have learned that I usually start with antiepileptic for a month or for a few days, because that give you an adequate time to develop rapport with the patient, adequate time for counseling, and adequate time for the patient to recognize the chance of relapse and recurrence. And usually by second or third follow-up, after adequately counseling and adequately they have convinced, I gradually taper off. But there are certain conditions where really, even with the first and seizure, you may require long-term antiepileptic. We will see them after some time. Now you have this EEG, very similar patient, proper Beck's, but here, if you can see, there are lots of spike and wave discharges. These are runs of spike and wave discharges. So when you have a high spike index, or when you get the report that are very frequent epileptiform discharges over centrotemporal region, even if you have a semiology which is a focal, always avoid carbamazepine or oxcarbazepine. The drug of choice here should be valproate, because oxcarbazepine or carbamazepine facilitate generalization. So many times what you get is worsening of seizure, or you get worsening of behavior. Though the seizure may not be there, you may get worsening of behavior because these drug worsens EEG. So whenever you get a report which states that very frequent or runs of epileptiform activity, always try to avoid carbamazepine or oxcarbazepine. This is, I think, another take-home message. So Beck's, this is the classical site what we have, lips, jaw, tongue, swallowing. This is the area which is very near to Sylvian fissure that's affected in Beck's. So coming to discussion, what we have is first unprovoked seizure. So how to approach? This is what we have. That chance of misdiagnosing a single paroxysmal event as a seizure is nearly 30%. And this is the data, where the consultant pediatrician in England misdiagnosed 31.7% children as having epilepsy. We Indians are no way inferior in clinical compared to the English people. So if you take from our side, at least if you take 30%, then also every third or every fourth patient who is on antiepileptic is a non-epileptic. and this is real a huge number. So how to reduce this? To reduce this, we should know a certain seizure mimics, and that we should rule out stepwise. And these seizure mimics are very much age specific. So in infancy, commonly you have jitteriness or benign sleep myoclonus. In childhood, you get breath holding spell, self gratification, benign paroxysmal vertigo. In late childhood or in adolescent, syncope, migraine variant, pseudo seizure, they are very common. So all these should be ruled out with a proper history taking. And again, equally important, there are certain proper epileptic seizures which may be mistaken for non-epileptiform events like frontal lobe seizures. We have seen now that the frontal lobe seizures may be mistaken for parasomnias first. Second, autonomic status, which are characterized by just omitting. Just flurry of omitting multiple times becomes pale, limp, and false. This is very well may be mistaken like cyclical omitting, which may be a part of some GI syndrome, endocrinal syndrome, or migraine. Third, visual seizures. Visual seizure or occipital lobe seizures, where you have visual aura, which very well may be mistaken as a classical migraine. And large is absence seizures, or what is called as daydreaming. The absence seizure characteristically never fall. You remember, these absences never fall. What they have is just episodes that last for 4 seconds to 20 seconds, becoming blank, uncommunicable, practically no motor activity, or just minimal lip smacking, minimal automatism, otherwise nothing. And you get hundreds of absences a day. You get flurry of absence. You will never get a single absence one day and another absence after a month. You get hundreds, thousands of absences. So, and they just one the absence, how patient interpret as absence. One patient came, the patient was of 8 to 10 years with a younger sibling who was of 4 years. आणि घरी सांगायची आईला, मम्मी मम्मी दीदी ढगात जाते, मम्मी मम्मी दीदी ढगात जाते. And this used to go on for few months. तिला 2 फटके पण दिले आईनी, तरी she used to say, unless the mother noticed this, will take nearly a month. And this is very characteristically the way they interpret is just random. And second one, दूसरा आणि एक सांगायचं, there's another one who so Xerox shop है, मुलगा hang होता, वो बच्चा हमारा hang हो जाता है. This was the second impression. So when you have such a type of symptoms, rather no one will predict this as a seizure. It's the pediatrician or it's the clinician who should make or bring into notice. And it's equally important to convince the parent that this is a seizure and not something else. So second point is to always rule out provoked or something which immediately causing seizure, something cause which is just underlying, that's the cause of seizure. Maybe metabolic, fever like febrile seizure, rotavirus induced, trauma induced, or poisoning. Camphor poisoning is very common, which we see during Ganpati or during Navratri. These are 2 common periods when we see camphor poisoning very commonly. Now we have unprovoked seizure, and the only way to diagnose unprovoked seizure in the OPD is clinical history, and clinical history. It's a proper history which clinches the diagnosis. And few points to be noted here is always take history from a person who have witnessed the seizure. It's many times it's the mother who witnesses the seizure, and many times it's the mother who sits outside in the waiting room and Aji Azoba they enter the room with the kids. So always ask them to bring that person who has witnessed this episode. Second, ask them to describe the circumstances. नहीं जेवता चक्कर आली and पडला. Always ask what happened and what they have seen rather than using the word chakkar. Ask them what you have seen. नाही जेवता अचानक हात थांबला, तोंडापाशीच गेला, नंतर डोळे हळूहळू एका बाजूला गेले, तोंड पण एका बाजूला गेलं, नंतर काय समजतच नव्हतं त्याला आणि झटक्यासारखं केलं. सो फ्रॉम the way you take the history, I think it's very easy to come to a conclusion. Always ask for circadian distribution. Nearly 2/3 of the seizure usually occur in sleep. Standing or sitting, syncope very likely to be in standing. So think of that. Ask for precipitating factors like flickering light, sleep deprivation, and always ask for the onset of seizure. Always ask what was the initial part, what is the first part they noticed, and that onset decides the localization, that decides the lateralization of the seizure. When possible, ask them to demonstrate physically, and many of the time they demonstrate quite well. If possible, ask them to do video sheeting. And it's the art of history taking and the expression power of the relative that decides the diagnosis many times. So now we have come to a conclusion that the seizure was unprovoked. So last one, whether it's need any treatment, this should be very much individualized. The chance of second seizure within a 1 year period ranges from 14% to 65%. There are certain things which increases chance of recurrent seizure, and these factors are: if you have abnormal neurological examination with delay, nocturnal seizures, focal seizures with Torr's paralysis, with positive family history, and with an abnormal EEG record. Also, there are certain factors should be considered in deciding this. Second, the risk of seizure recurrence, which we have seen now. Second one is the duration of first seizure. Now, if the first seizure is status, it doesn't increase the chance of second seizure, but it increases the chance that the second seizure will also be a status epilepticus, very likely. And if we know that a single status may be equally damaging compared to any other thing. So if it is status epilepticus, that definitely indicates treatment. Degree of parental anxiety, again, very important. And last one is whether patient stays in the remote area. Many of the time, particularly in our Raigad district, it takes at least more than a half an hour to reach a pediatrician. And it takes more than an hour at least to reach Panvel, where it's really a tertiary care center is available. So there are, other than factors, the factor of recurrence, there are certain other factors also should be considered when we are considering regarding treatment. Now, which drug should be chosen? We all know, without wasting time, it's the valproate if it's generalized seizure, it's carbamazepine if it is focal seizure. Levetiracetam, now it's very favorite one, which can be used on the either side. But from my experience, at least in last few years, the efficacy wise, our old agents, both valproate and carbamazepine, are much superior compared to the levetiracetam. Safety profile wise, side effect wise, levetiracetam is quite good, but efficacy wise, it's the other way. It's the valproate, carbamazepine or oxcarbazepine is much superior compared to this. Now, there are certain seizures where it's really impossible to diagnose it as a first seizure. As we have seen before, absences. Once you diagnose the absences, there must be thousands of absences the patient must have experienced. And second, similarly applies to myoclonic seizure. So when you diagnose absence or when you diagnose myoclonic seizure, they are never first unprovoked seizure. They are always multiple. So always start with antiepileptic. And one thing every pediatrician should know is there are certain epilepsies which are precipitated by carbamazepine. These are myoclonic, absences, atonic. So always when you are suspecting these type of seizure, always try to avoid carbamazepine, always try to avoid oxcarbazepine. And last, and the most important take-home message is phenytoin sodium should never be used as a long-term antiepileptic drug in children. This always should be kept in mind. So just ending my talk with a sweet girl. This is 5-6 years girl. This is basically old photograph when she came to me, she was on antiepileptic for last 3 years, sorry. Was started by one of the GPs, was still getting seizures. She had neonatal hypoglycemic injury. Well preserved, but started getting seizure after 5-6 years of age. Flurry of seizures, and so one GP was treating the girl and was on tablet for last 3 years. And this is the same girl when she came to me.
Oh.
So the drug is
Phenytoin.
phenytoin,
Phenytoin.
and this is the criminal use, I think. The completely, absolutely changed face, where you have huge gum atrophy, bushy eyebrows, coarse faces. So always try to avoid phenytoin to a maximum. This is the gums what she had, swollen gums. So these are few of the take-home messages. Thank you.
Thank you, Samara sir. It was a great presentation and very useful in day-to-day practice. Now, may I request Dr. Patil sir to start with his presentation? We will take the question answer session at the end of this presentation.
Dr. Sambaris has stopped sharing.
Oh, sir.
Okay, good evening, Dr. Shekhar here. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, so Mahesh has actually led the front, and I'm going to cover up with the second scenario. I thank the IAP team, Raigad branch, for actually giving me this opportunity, and Dr. Mohite to actually be kind enough to actually forward this invitation to both Mahesh Sambare and me. And I'm going to cover few scenarios. So the first scenario that I'm going to talk about are recurrent focal seizures and what do we actually do in terms of the medical management. So I'm going to start off with a case story. 8.5-year-old boy, and this was the first episode of seizure. It was a nocturnal event with the head and eye deviation to one side, twitching of the eyelids and the angle of the mouth, and there was the left-sided jerking of the extremities. So when we look at this, you have a focal semiology because you have the head and eye deviation to one side, you had the twitching of angle of the mouth and the eyelids, and there was the left-sided jerking. So a left motor seizure, but the right hemispheric origin. Now, given this scenario and what Mahesh had spoken to us about, whether yes, this is a right hemispheric focal motor seizure, what further information is required? If the question is asked, then what we actually look at prior to that, we'll probably look at the possibilities. So what are the possibilities in such a scenario? So you could have an acute symptomatic seizure. It could be an age-limited focal epilepsy of childhood, a prototype being the benign Rolandic epilepsy, or it could be a symptomatic epilepsy. So in a first case scenario, yes, the background story also is important for us to actually make a diagnosis of symptomatic epilepsy. So someone may have an abnormal neurological examination, developmental issues, which then give rise to a suspicion that this may be a symptomatic epilepsy. If the entire story preceding the first episode was completely normal, then you are left with two possibilities. Either it is an acute symptomatic seizure, which could be a neurocysticercosis, for an example. It could be an infarct, a vascular etiology, or it could be an age-limited focal epilepsy of childhood, probably one of the most common epilepsies in childhood, and presenting with a nocturnal semiology. So neurocysticercosis would be one example for an acute symptomatic seizure. If you look at benign Rolandic epilepsy, that would be the other example for the age-limited focal epilepsy of childhood. And if we look at the MRIs, now let us say that a first focal episode, you can be justified because that is what we have been promoting, that yes, for a focal seizure, you should be actually asking for a imaging. It could be a CT scan, it could be an MRI, whatever is feasible and whatever is available at your setting, that is what you should be doing. And I'm showing a very classical image of a neurocysticercosis. So this is the cyst that we are actually seeing with the scolex in between white fluid and a black ring around it. So we have the central dark spot, which would be the scolex. The white ring is actually the fluid. The dark ring surrounding the white area is actually the wall, and perilesional edema. So this would be the reason why he actually had the seizure. So this is classical, the colloid vesicular stage of the NCC, a degenerating cyst, and the degenerating cyst or the calcific cyst are the ones that would be responsible for seizures. So being common in this scenario, we should be aware of this possibility. So we would actually be asking for the test. Now, in this particular scenario, the first MRI which was asked for and returned came back as normal. And we actually had an awake EEG which was normal. Now, in the setting that you should be looking at a childhood epilepsy, a sleep EEG is warranted. And whenever possible, that is what we should attempt. So a normal awake EEG probably has no meaning in this scenario because it could point towards either way. You can actually say that this is just for this particular scenario, maybe a normal finding, so maybe not an epileptic EEG, but we would be wanting a sleep record for this scenario of a nocturnal epilepsy, a normal MRI brain. Now, we actually have many centers, we actually do an MRI. You have a 0.5 Tesla, refurbished MRI is 1.5 Tesla, 3 Tesla MRI. So a normal MRI, unless and until you see the films for yourself, provided, yes, we are tuned to read our films ourselves. So unless until we are certain and we do not discuss it with a neuroradiologist, the report of a normal MRI scan should actually be accepted with a pinch of salt. Now, this would be evident in this scenario. So here we start off with a single episode of a seizure, and we had the preliminary test coming back to us, assuming that the metabolic parameters and all the other things were normal, that the EEG is normal, the MRI is normal. So what we decided that, okay, maybe we wait for the anti-seizure medication and then let us see how we move it. You could go either way. You could actually start the medication and probably call them back after a month or two for a follow-up and then take it forward, or you can actually discuss this and then probably send them away and ask them to come back, provided you are certain that they are going to follow up with you. Now, they returned after 1 month, and then the reason they came back to see was the recurrence of a similar episode on the prior night. So now we have 2 episodes with a normal MRI and a normal awake EEG. But regardless of this, now we confirm that 2 seizures, so we should be looking at starting or initiating the anti-seizure medication, and carbamazepine was initiated, assuming that this is a focal seizure of the right hemispheric origin. So we are justified in using a drug which is licensed or used primarily for focal epilepsy. Now we can have a choice and argument regarding to which medicine to choose. You could choose carbamazepine, you could choose oxcarbazepine, you could choose levetiracetam, but I would probably stick to carbamazepine here. Then, as probably many people may be aware that yes, this is a common scenario. So he went to his native place for a few months, and but he couldn't actually come back to see me. So every 3 months, let's say you get a call stating that the seizures are still there, they are occurring week in, week out, they are still there, similar pattern. So then if that is the case, now that whatever is going on, there is recurrence, what would you ask him? So if this question is actually put to you, so you should actually just be looking at whether the pattern of the seizure has changed. So whatever was witnessed earlier, is the same seizure type continuing? So are we looking at 1 seizure type? Are we looking at 2 seizure types? So if the semiology has not changed, then probably if you are comfortable, you can actually advise. So let us say that you had given him a prescription of carbamazepine, and then you said that, okay, let us believe that the seizures are still the same. And then you decide to say that, okay, I'll send you a prescription for clobazam, and you add in 5 milligram of clobazam at night, and then revert in few weeks. Let us see how things go. So he says, doc, my son is sleeping a lot. Earlier also he was moving like a zombie, and now it's even worse. So, okay, you believe that probably he's actually being doped because being on carbamazepine. And then now that you're going to add clobazam, things probably look different. So you decide that, okay, I think you should, this is it, enough. You come back and you come and visit me. First thing that you do is now, okay, you are on carbamazepine, now show me the meds. And to your surprise, and you're running cold sweats now, that actually there was an error. And the pharmacist was giving him clozapine instead of carbamazepine at his native place. So now you're in a soup that you have been prescribing carbamazepine, and then he is taking clozapine. So then what do? Do we call it as refractory epilepsy? Because that was the thought process when I decided to actually add in clobazam. But then now that he's not even on the single medication that I had actually initially prescribed, then you should really think about it. So now we go back and then probably tell him that, okay, you restart carbamazepine and then let us see how things go. So the message is that if you actually come across someone who comes to you and tells you that, yes, even after the appropriate dose, appropriate medication, I'm actually still having the seizures, it is our responsibility to ask him to get back his medications and confirm with him that he is taking the correct dose, the correct strength, and the correct medicine. That is our sense. So only then we can actually move ahead and say that this is refractory epilepsy. So now the question that we need to ask is that, okay, he's been having seizures, and let us assume that he actually was on the right dose of carbamazepine, and then you actually did manage to push him on clobazam, and he has come back to you now with the same story that, yes, I am still having recurrence of seizures. So what we need to do is we need to reconfirm the semiology. Okay, so now is the seizure still of the same type that you had originally described? Which means that on the case sheet somewhere, you should also make a note of the first episode, and then always keep on mentioning that the pattern has essentially remained the same. If the pattern has changed, probably it is time to actually go back and look at your EEG and MRI. Now, the first EEG was actually awake EEG. So if it is possible to get a sleep EEG, fine. If your earlier sleep EEG was normal, then you should actually ask for a prolonged EEG. So in scenarios where we are actually looking at definite epilepsy, but we are unable to actually categorize it, either within an age-limited epilepsy phenomena or within the symptomatic epilepsy category, then I would actually go for a more prolonged EEG. So you can be justified in this setting to ask for an overnight. And at the same time, we consider repeating the MRI. But then this time, we may actually look at a 3 Tesla scan. So this applies to a scenario where you are actually ensuring that he is on 2 good medicines. So the 2 first-line medicines going on for 6 months, no response, continuing the same type of seizures or probably multiple type of seizures, we are going to label this child as a drug refractory epilepsy. Provided we have categorized the seizure type correctly, we have used the medication for an appropriate person, which means that if I am actually looking at a generalized epilepsy, I should not be using a narrow spectrum medication. A narrow spectrum medication is the one that we use only for focal epilepsies, whereas for generalized, we actually call them broad spectrum. So if you are looking at a focal epilepsy, you are justified using medicines within the focal epilepsy category or the broad spectrum category. But if it is the generalized epilepsy, then ideally you should be looking at choosing a medicine only from the broad spectrum. So then what are the medicines that we actually can choose from? So you have a long list: carbamazepine, oxcarbazepine, eslicarbazepine, retigabine or ezogabine, lacosamide, the new medicine, brivaracetam, perampanel, pregabalin, tiagabine. Now, I have not added levetiracetam here, but do remember that all the new medicines that come onto the block actually are licensed for add-on medication for focal seizures, and usually they are licensed for 16 years and above. Over time, but you still are justified in using these medications. So like, let us look at levetiracetam. So when it was actually licensed for use in epilepsy, it was only as an add-on for focal seizures, never prescribed as monotherapy. So as you use it and you probably are comfortable understanding the benefits and the side effect of the medicines, you probably would then use it for children. Now, on an ethical grounds, you cannot enroll children for trials of new medications. Hence, the licensing is always 16 years and above. That is the thing that we need to understand. So from a licensing standpoint, the licensing will be only after 16 years beyond when they first are launched into the market. So we look at carbamazepine, we have good experience. Oxcarbazepine, yes, we are, though it is a relatively not a new one, newer, what let us say that probably end of the 20th century. Eslicarbazepine, it was there in the market, and then again it was disappeared, again has been relaunched, but it will be primarily for focal epilepsies. Retigabine. So we have something which is known as precision medicine for epilepsy. So now retigabine will be primarily used for potassium channel related epilepsies because that is where its primary action is. Lacosamide, again on the sodium channels, but fast inactivation, slow inactivation of the sodium channels, licensed for focal epilepsy, but available as an injectable preparation, which means that you can use it even for status. Brivaracetam, the new kid on the block, newest kid on the block, sort of elder or the cousin to levetiracetam, multifold increase in the affinity to the SV2 receptor, which is the binding molecule for levetiracetam, and has the same spectrum, but a slightly higher control compared to levetiracetam, and probably a lesser side effect on the behavioral issues or behavioral front compared to levetiracetam. So yes, brivaracetam at the moment licensed for focal seizures can be used, yeah, and it will be now available as a syrup formulation also. So you can definitely use it even for younger kids, and the licensing will go on similar to levetiracetam. You can prescribe it eventually even for neonatal seizures, which we are using even for levetiracetam. Perampanel. Now perampanel is actually licensed for focal epilepsy, AMPA agonist. And this is now also being licensed for generalized epilepsy. The remaining two, we do not generally use them for epilepsy. So pregabalin was licensed for epilepsy, but we now know that it is more beneficial for neuropathic pain rather than actually epilepsy. So the reason I'm actually discussing this list is that the scenario after two medication is that you can choose any of the medicine which is there in the list and hope for the best. Now, if you look at the original study, which was published by Kwan and Brody, which was the actual epidemiological study for what happens to people with epilepsy, adult-based study, but we actually look at that literature to actually counsel the families. So in their literature, they found 64% respond to one or two medications, 36 do not respond. So it means that only 64% will have good response to medications, remaining would be labeled as drug refractory. They subsequently looked at the same group and kept on adding the newer medications to actually generate multiple combinations and hope that they actually do well. So the 64% actually at best went up to 69%. So which means that if you actually are sitting in your consulting room, you know that a person walks into your room, has epilepsy, he has a 70% chance of falling into the category of being a responsive epileptic and a 30% chance to be in the category of a non-drug responder epilepsy. For this particular scenario, then you actually have to look at choose this medication. Now, do I have a choice with which one do I do? So we actually look at something which is known as rational therapy for epilepsy, which is a concept which was actually proposed looking at combination of medications based on their mechanisms of action. So if you actually have sodium valproate, you would try to combine it something which acts on a different site. So based on this principle, you would say that, okay, levetiracetam can work with anyone because it's a completely novel mechanism of action. But rational polytherapy has not shown any such real benefit in the world of practical practice of epilepsy. Now, when we look at the two combinations which really have benefited people, one is sodium valproate plus lamotrigine, and the second combination is sodium valproate plus ethosuximide. So sodium valproate plus lamotrigine primarily focused on the generalized epilepsy. We use it for Lennox-Gastaut tonic seizures, but also can be used for focal epilepsies. Because if you look at the broad spectrum medicine, they can be used for focal epilepsies as well. Apart from these two combinations, none of the combinations actually have been of proven material. So you are left out on your own trying to actually look at the best possible combination. But I would suggest that you can choose a medicine which you are comfortable using with, rather than because it is newer kid on the block and try and use it. So if you are happy using levetiracetam as an add-on, I think you should continue using that. And if you wish to try anything else, then probably you should look at brivaracetam, because it will have the same profile and easy to handle, may not have that much drug-to-drug combinations. Whereas the other settings are completely different, like retigabin, which actually is not available, but we would be primarily for the potassium channelopathies. So if I look at potassium channelopathies, which amongst these epilepsies that I'm going to see, the ones that you are actually going to see which are refractory, are the common ones that we are going to see is the neonatal hypoglycemic brain injury, which occurs day 2, day 3 of life, and which results in long-term refractory epilepsy or long-term epilepsy, which can be refractory. So in that setting, the broad spectrum and focal seizure category medications tend to do well, and there is no need to actually look at the newer kids. But levetiracetam, brivaracetam, perampanel, yes, perampanel has shown promise in a newer medicine. So there was a trial in which people try to look at what is the proportion. So the earlier prediction model was that if I failed 3 medications, then if I add in the 4th medication, the probability of me being seizure free is barely 3%. Now it's very dismal if I have to tell you that if you are failing the medicine and you come back to me and I give you another medicine, your probability is only 3%. So then some people actually felt that this is a wrong way of looking at things, and they attempted multiple combinations. So even so, you look at the refractory population category and come back to you, and then probably look at multiple combinations. You keep on trying, and actually then they propose that okay, the 15% within that refractory category actually became responsive to medications. So probably, okay, 15% is still not too great, but better than 3% if we actually look at it. So the combination is not this. So the rational therapy also does not truly exist in terms of the practical end point of the therapy. We do feel that, okay, if I use a medicine which has a different mechanism of action, I'm going to do well, but that may not necessarily be true. Good on paper, but not too great on practice. So then what we look about is the generalized epilepsy or the generalized seizure. I should not be using generalized epilepsy, but medications for generalized seizures. So you have sodium valproate, lamotrigine, levetiracetam, licensing has moved it from focal to generalized now, phenobarbital, phenytoin, zonisamide, topiramate, benzodiazepines. So benzodiazepines and rufinamide. Now rufinamide again only for Lennox-Gastaut, not available with us. The others are available with us. Prudent use, making sure that you're not actually creating more difficulties, similar to the kid that Mahesh showed, that phenytoin induced gum hypertrophy and complete disfigurement of the face, primarily because of long-term use of phenytoin. That should be avoided. We are also worried about I don't know how many of you treat adolescent kids, but then you actually then look at the changing the medications, about the antenatal care that may be required as the girl moves to a woman of childbearing age, and which medicine should be ideally prescribed for her if we think that this is a juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, where we are looking at medications for the long term. So when we look at refractory epilepsy, we are looking at multiple combinations, primarily focused on the medical management. But if I have to offer something else, and if there is a structural pathology, then I would definitely look at evaluating that particular child for offering a cure, which would be within the epilepsy surgery domain. So do I actually look at epilepsy surgery? And if that is a possibility, yes, a single lesion available for focal resection, you should send or throughput this child to an epilepsy surgery program so that you can actually do good for that child. The other options that are available are ketogenic diet, available only through specialized centers and dietitians who really are good and expert in handling the nuances in the diet. And the last, but something which was available a few years ago again and has now come back, is vagal nerve stimulation. Vagal nerve stimulation is something which will be for refractory epilepsy, does not really guarantee seizure freedom. It works over time. and over time the behavior also changed. So we know that people have come back for battery replacement, which means that the parents are not really looking only at the aspect of seizure freedom, but probably also at the quality of life. So all these aspects also need to be addressed. So that's one thing that you also need to look at it some point in time, that what are the parents looking for. Maybe they're coming back to you every year, and they actually are now know that this child probably has a refractory. You've tried multiple combinations. What is it that they're looking for? Are they looking for seizure freedom? Are they looking for quality of life? And probably your approach to that scenario should be individualized, based on the understanding. And if they do not have complete knowledge, probably you should be actually offering them the concept of quality of life, how you can actually make their life better. That would be a complete refractory epilepsy management in the true sense, though we may not be able to actually completely cure the child or control the seizures, but on the overall front, we should be doing well for the child. So that is where I want to end for this talk. Maybe we can continue with Mahesh's talk and then maybe come back.
Hello. Hello.
Hello?
Shekhar, can I share my screen now?
Yeah, I have stopped actually.
Okay, fine. So this is the second part of the today's discussion, where we will go through few of the cases. Basically, these are simple cases which we come day to day across, but with some message. Maybe minor changes may help us a lot in treatment of these cases. So let's start one by one. So these are the case with a message. So there should be at least one message what we expect at the end of the case. So let's start with the common scenarios what we come across. Case 1, it's 10-month boy, non-consensuous marriage. I'm audible, no? Hello? Hello?
Yes. Continue.
This full-term normal delivery, NICU stay on day 3 for neonatal seizure. As we all know, day 3 seizure, unless otherwise proved, very likely to be neonatal hypoglycemic seizures. So he had a documented neonatal hypoglycemia. What he developed is sudden jerky movements of trunk and extremities that occurs in clusters, and usually after getting up from sleep. Now these doesn't look like proper seizures or proper clonic jerking. What you get is just one jerk, stays calm for a second or two, again second jerk, stays calm, again third jerk. So basically this doesn't look like a seizure proper. So if you know this entity, it's not difficult to diagnose. If you don't know this entity, it's really difficult to take it as a seizure. So this is very important to know the semiology of infantile spasms. So addition to this, the baby has excess irritability, and gradually over a period there was loss of smiling, loss of cooing, loss of interacting, and the EEG showing classical hypsarrhythmic pattern. Hypsarrhythmia is something chaotic EEG with high amplitude, multifocal epileptiform discharges, generalization, burst suppression, everything comes. It's the worst form of EEG to have. So what we have here are infantile spasms, neuronal regression with hypsarrhythmia. So this is classical symptomatic West syndrome. Symptomatic because we have a defined cause here, which is neonatal hypoglycemia. And this is the MRI, which is very classical. If you can see here, these are T2 axial images, where you can see here very well T2 hyperintensities over bilateral occipital area. The neonatal hypoglycemia practically always fire occipital lobe. So, and these are the worst injury to have. They are very prone for infantile spasms. They are very prone for mental delay and all bad things. And this was the EEG, which was multifocal spikes, generalization, burst suppression. So this is something bad EEG, and this is what you get normal well EEG in sleep. You can see the difference. So diagnosis very straightforward. It's symptomatic West syndrome. So drug of choice, as we all know, it's high dose steroid is indicated here. The routine prednisolone, what we use, you can use ACTH, but if ACTH is not available, if the patient cannot give ACTH, it's staying periphery, in that case, you can give oral steroid. The only thing, the dose of oral steroid or oral prednisolone, which we use as a 2 milligram per kg, in West syndrome or in infantile spasm, the dose should be 4 to 8 milligram per kg per day, which is very high dose, practically toxic dose. What I use is usually by 6 milligram per kg over next 4 to 6 weeks. And many of them, they respond to that. Avoid vaccination, keep clean, rest, all the things that should be followed. So here, clinical spasms settled over a period, EEG improved. So patient was later shifted to oral valproate and continued. Now there are certain drugs can be used here in infantile spasms are ACTH, as we all know, vigabatrin, though it's specific drug for specific condition, can very well be used with a good efficacy here. Topiramate in high dose, very good drug. Zonisamide, very good for infantile spasms. Nitrazepam, so rather than clobazam or clonazepam what we use for infantile spasms, nitrazepam is a better option. And sodium valproate, it also acts quite good in infantile spasm as a supportive drug. Now, equally important is there are certain drugs that worsen spasms. So there are certain drugs which have no role, rather should be absolutely avoided if you are suspecting infantile spasms. So carbamazepine, oxcarbazepine, phenobarbital, phenytoin. If you have an infant here, always, practically always, the drug of choice what we have is phenobarbital. Always we start with phenobarbital, that's fine, because we consider as seizure in infants that drug of choice, as rightly said. But in infantile spasms, it's not the phenobarbital. It should be a specific drug that works for infantile spasm or for West syndrome. So take home message from here, phenobarbital has no role in the treatment of infantile spasms. So for that, you should first know what are spasms. So first get well versed with the spasm semiology. Once you know that these are infantile spasms, better to avoid phenobarbital and better to have a proper opinion, because it's going to require a specialized treatment. Second one, West syndrome is a neurological emergency because it's an epileptic encephalopathy. Why? We have seen here that along with the jerk, what he had loss of cooing, he has loss of smiling, there is loss of cognitive milestone. So on this cognitive milestone or this cognition delay is many times is permanent if not treated within time. So if you are suspecting infantile spasm or West syndrome, treat is as a neuronal emergency and should be treated urgently, referred urgently for EEG. So all patients who have neonatal hypoglycemia, always tell the patient that if they notice jerking of the baby, inform immediately. And usually this age starts by 4 to 6 months of age to first year. So this is the classical age when they develop infantile spasms. So always tell that whenever they notice the jerking, like this is the classical words what they use. They never use this as a seizures because they doesn't look like seizures. What you get is just jerking, like excess startle, what we see. This is very likely to be like excess startle. So always ask positively whether if you notice this thing during this period of age, always inform immediately to me. So this is the take home message for first case. We have similar case 1B. Here everything is same except there is no NICU stay and developmentally normal here. Otherwise everything same, hypsarrhythmic EEG, same EEG. This is what he had. These are Ashleaf patches. So diagnosis, very straightforward, tuberous sclerosis. So second point to be noticed here is if you have an infantile spasms in developmentally normal child, well head grown, no NICU stay, everything normal, always look very consciously or positively for any neurocutaneous markers. And if you have this one, the drug of choice here is rather than steroids, here it's the vigabatrin. This is the MRI which classically shows cortical tumors. These are these whitish or hyper intense. This is T2 axial image. These are cortical tumors, and these are subependymal tumors, red one. Subependymal tumors, what we everyone know classically is candle dipping appearance. So this is the candle dipping appearance which are dipping in the lateral ventricle. So this is the classical MRI of tuberous sclerosis. The drug of choice here is practically always vigabatrin. But vigabatrin is something which is now not available in India, sparsely available because it's something which is imported. So many times you get, many times you don't get. So in that case, though it's not the option, you have to go for steroids, you have to go for topiramate, zonisamide, the other drugs. But if it's available, it should always be the first choice. The spasm settles like anything. Here the spasms stopped within 4 days. There was complete resolution of hips arrhythmia. So here, if you have a patient with West syndrome or unprovoked seizure, anywhere with a normal birth history, always examine in detail for neurocutaneous marker. And this diagnosis you can pick up in your OPD quite easily. And second thing is, the drug of choice for the spasms that develop with tuberous sclerosis is vigabatrin and not ACTH or steroids. So this is the first case. Let's move rapidly to the second one. This is a 10-year-old boy studying in 4th standard with an average performance. He had an episodic event with onset at 8 years of age every 10-15 days, becoming blank, uncommunicable, unresponsive. So looks like absences, but again, what we have said before, absences occur hundreds a day. What he had is every 10 to 15 days. So history, very important. Some chewing like lip smacking movement. These are automatisms. Rapid picking, random picking of clothes, gestural automatisms with fearful face. Now this is very important. If you are getting this history, fearful face, practically you never get in absence. It's blank face what you get. Fearful face is very classically what you say either with temporal lobe or something with frontal lobe. So very likely to be complex focal seizure, where you have automatisms where patient becomes blank with no jerking. And classically, it starts with something pitta-like. Discomfort starts in the stomach. And this is proper aura what you get with mesial temporal epilepsy. Like unusual feeling. What the feels, they also don't know. But something unusual feeling that starts in the stomach, followed by the episode what we have described now. So duration lasts for 2 to 5 minutes. Never major jerking. There was history of febrile seizure 5 times from 1 to 4 years of age. And one of that at 2.5 years, there was febrile status that lasted for more than 2 hours that required PICU admission. There was no neurocutaneous marker, no motor deficit. On EEG, there is focal epileptiform discharges were noted over left anterior temporal region without generalization. And CT was normal. So we have seen semiology wise looks like complex focal seizure. Why not absences? Because they are very infrequent, they are quite prolonged. Absences very likely to be in seconds. Complex focal seizure very likely to be minutes. These are infrequent seizures. Automatisms are very common with complex focal seizure, which are not there usually with absences. And also EEG, what we have very much suggestive, it's of temporal origin. But the CT done showing no obvious structural anomaly. So in view of complex focal, patient was started on carbamazepine, was stepped up. As seizures continued, levetiracetam was added. Seizure frequency reduced to 1 per 1.5 to 2 months. Initially 10-15 days. To some extent, you got relief here, but still ongoing. So what's next? Anything else you want to do here? You have EEG, which is abnormal, but you have a CT, which is normal. But still, if you have complex focal seizure, which are not well controlled, always go for
MRI.
better imaging. Here, because there are certain things which can very well be missed on CT. And one of these, which is very well treatable, is hippocampal sclerosis or mesial temporal sclerosis. This is FLAIR coronal images. This is the right hippocampus, left hippocampus. Compared to right one, this left one is small in size. Compared to right one, left one is brighter in compared to left one. And second, if you can see, this temporal horn is much dilated on this side. And this is because atrophy of this one. It's not only this, you can see the lateral ventricle is much more dilated this side compared to this one. This is because the whole of the temporal lobe got atrophied over a period of time. Even the Sylvian fissure, if you can see here, this one is much prominent compared to right one. So what you have here is right hippocampal sclerosis with atrophy. Left hippocampal sclerosis. It's by mistake. So at this point, what you can do, you can have a surgical option. So when you don't have, you have complex focal seizure which are not remitting, in spite of treatment, always think out of box, something not we are missing here. So take home message from here is mesial temporal lobe seizures can mimic absence seizures. How to differentiate? Just I have told. CT is not always an adequate modality of imaging. So if you are getting complex focal seizures, if you are getting multiple times, better to go for MRI. And that also, remember, don't do MRI of 0.3 Tesla, 0.5 Tesla, which is available routinely at the periphery. There is no chance that this lesion will be picked on that MRI. So if you are suspecting really something minute or something subtle which has missed on CT, always go for at least 1.5 T MRI. So you can pick up, otherwise you will be same one, you will have a normal report in your hand. Third thing, what is the cause of this hippocampal sclerosis? If you remember in the history, there was a history of febrile status at 2.5 years of age. As we all know, febrile seizures are benign one, but febrile status are not benign. Febrile status are equally damaging compared to non-febrile status. What we have prolonged status lasting for more than 2 hours at 2.5 years of age. And that is very likely maybe the cause of hippocampal sclerosis, what we are seeing here. So remember, always try to cut short the seizure duration, whether it's febrile one or whether it is afebrile one. And last one, that always remember, if you have used antiepileptic, still there is something you can offer, should be thought of. Either you think of this surgical option, either you think of ketogenic diet or something else that you can offer to the patient. So this was the second case. Let's have a third case, which is the last one from my side. This is 6-year-old female child, non-consensuous marriage, no perinatal issues, developmentally normal. Episodes of multifocal jerking with staring lasting for 2-3 minutes, 3 times in 24 hours unprovoked. So very like proper multifocal clonic seizures. Patient was normal in between the episodes. In view of multiple seizures, what admitted, metabolic workup was normal, EEG was normal, MRI was normal. Patient was loaded with phenytoin and was discharged on phenobarbital. So settled back to home. Patient has repeat seizure after 3 weeks. Again, multiple seizures, admitted with prolonged staring episode, received lorazepam for that. Again, loading with phenytoin was done, levetiracetam was added. So now patient was on phenobarbital, levetiracetam, pyridoxine. Discharge on this. Repeat seizure after 15 days. Now here multiple episodes lasting 1 to 2 days, multiple times a day. So every 15 days, patient used to get seizure and requiring admission. Again, phenytoin loading was done. Repeat EEG was normal. discharge on phenobarbital, levetiracetam, topiramate, pyridoxine. Now, by 12 months of age, baby was not sitting. This story started at 6 months of age. So over period of next 6 months, patient has somewhat delayed development. So over next few months, admitted for nearly 6 times, and nearly 3 EEGs were done. All EEGs were normal between 6 months to 18 months period. And the medicines used here were phenobarbital, levetiracetam, topiramate, lamotrigine, valproate, clobazam. So practically all the antiepileptics in the book were used along with pyridoxine, the folinic acid, the all other vitamins which are used to treat the epilepsy. So what's next? So at this point, when you have everything failing, we have to go for genetics. That is something which we rarely do, but in certain cases, I think that's the only thing what we have, where you have multiple seizures, normal metabolic, normal MRI, pharmacoresistant with progressive developmental delay developing. So here genetics was done, and this was the genetic report, which showed that there is mutation in the SCN8A gene, which autosomal dominant, heterozygous, which is very likely to be pathogenic. Now, this report is something very much shocking, because this is the report which made us to do something which is very much unethical. What's that? That this patient was started on phenytoin. Patient was started on phenytoin at 5 milligram per kg per day, and other antiepileptics were continued. Patient had no seizure for next 1 month. Other AEDs were gradually tapered off, continued only with phenytoin. Seizure free for last 7 months. We tried to shift to carbamazepine from phenytoin, as both are sodium channel blockers, but still there was proper relapse. So patient was continued on phenytoin with a minimal dose of 3 milligram per kg, and along with this lacosamide was added. So still at now 7-8 months down the line, patient is seizure free compared to the previous one, where patient is admitted nearly 8-10 times within 1 year. So this is the drug of choice, but here we hardly have any option for phenytoin. So low dose phenytoin with lacosamide, presently patient is on, and patient is seizure free. This is the reference which state that phenytoin as a last resort treatment for SCN8A encephalopathy. And this is what we had. Patient is presently on phenytoin and lacosamide, and we don't know what's the next, but I think at the minimal dose of 2-3 milligram, if the patient is seizure free, we hope that she will not develop the side effect what you have seen before. Thank you.
Okay, Smash.
Done, sir.
That's it. Shekhar,
Thank you so much, Sambal sir.
Yeah. Thank you.
Shekhar has one more.
I would
Manish,
like to
Shekhar?
thank Mr. Shekhar.
One more to go, if we can.
Yeah, go ahead, definitely.
Okay, so I'll keep this short. So we are looking at a single case scenario. We're going to talk about something related to emergency in epilepsy, which would be status epilepticus. So we had a 12-year-old boy. He was slightly dull after waking up, and 1 hour later, he throws a generalized seizure. He is rushed to the hospital. At the hospital, there is a second seizure, quickly followed by a third seizure that then is prolonged. So when we look at the status epilepticus, what we would actually say that it's a seizure or a series of seizures that last for 30 minutes or more without regaining consciousness between the seizures. It's the ultimate expression of epilepsy, and it could be due to failure of mechanisms which terminate seizures. Now, this 30 minutes actually is from an animal model study. But when you look at an operational definition, the operational definition earlier was proposed to be 7 minutes and then at 5 minutes. So what it means that a seizure which lasts for 5 minutes has a high probability of going up to 30 minutes and then creating the havoc that we know a status of 30 minutes would create. And hence the emergency medicine and the advice to use midazolam nasal puffs at 5 minutes of interval, because if you actually abort it early, then the probability of the 30-minute event does not arise. We know for sure that the brain by itself actually has mechanisms which bring on the seizure, and it also has mechanisms to terminate the seizures. And this probably is the reason why you end up having status, because the normal natural mechanisms that are present in the brain which can terminate seizures fail, and that is why you actually have a seizure or a status. So when we actually look at the treatment, so the initial treatment, so we actually look at 2 doses of benzodiazepine. Lorazepam is preferred if it is available. Otherwise, we probably would be looking at using midazolam. Now, midazolam is administered in a pre-hospital setting given the current scenario that we have, and we know that many people have the nasal spray. If it is the first episode, then probably they may not. But if the child is a known epileptic and he actually may have had seizures, then it is prudent to check whether another dose has been received before coming to the hospital and whether the appropriate dose has been administered. Now, one thing to remember about benzodiazepine, that if you actually treat it with an improper dose, then you probably may actually propagate a seizure and may end up being a status. So a correct dose of benzodiazepines, lorazepam at 0.1 milligram per kg, maximum of being 4 milligram, is advocated. So 2 doses of benzodiazepine, including the first dose. So if the first pre-hospital setting administration is done, then you only give the first dose. Then you actually move to the second line. So what is the second line? So you can choose between phenytoin, fosphenytoin, valproate, levetiracetam, and lacosamide, because these are the ones that are available for as an intravenous preparation, and they have shown to be of similar efficacy. So whether you choose to use phenytoin, fosphenytoin, just remember the dose change. Phenytoin 20 milligram per kg. We actually have fosphenytoin. Now, the reason I've not actually added phenobarbital is probably because it is difficult to procure at given the current time. But if you have phenobarbital, then that also can be considered as an appropriate option, an alternative. The time that is taken to administer the phenytoin and fosphenytoin actually rules against them, because valproate, levetiracetam, and lacosamide can actually be given as boluses, which means that slow pushes over a 5-minute period, whereas the entire phenytoin dose may be pushed over 20 to 30-minute period. So if you look at that timeline, maybe having something as boluses may suit your purpose very well. And when you are actually thinking of status, then you should probably be looking at continuous EEG monitoring if it is available, which means that a status should be managed in a center which has an ICU capability. So when we look at a general guideline, we're looking at pre-hospital setting, where if you have the rectal diazepam, that is what we were using, midazolam, buccal preparation is what is advocated world over. We have the nasal preparation. And then when you're back in a hospital setting, you look at airway, breathing, circulation, which means that the principles of management remain the same. ABCs and D are added, and then we actually have the immediate IV access and use lorazepam. If you have 2 previous doses of benzodiazepine, you move over to phenytoin, phenobarbital, or whatever you have. And what the current understanding is that if you actually fail your first line, there is no point actually waiting for giving the second and the third, and so maybe you keep on loading. Best is to actually get him to an ICU, hook them up onto the system, and see whether you actually can achieve burst suppression, which means that thiopentone, midazolam continuous infusion, propofol infusion come higher in the line. So that is probably what we should be doing. So if you actually are still continuing to have seizures, which by this time may not be actual clinical seizures, so you are just continuing to have electrical status, which itself is more, can be equally, if not more damaging. So you have to move on to midazolam infusion, thiopentone. So when we look at midazolam infusion, if we are in a setting, we cannot really support them to transfer, or we are in the process of transferring, then we actually look at 2 microgram per kg per minute to 24 microgram as a recommendation. But in simple terms, you're looking at 0.1 milligram per kg per hour to 2 milligram per kg per hour. That is the best. Thiopentone, you give a loading dose of 5 to 6 milligram per kg, which is pentobarbital, and then you actually look at continuing that infusion at 1 to 6 milligram per kg per hour. A short duration propofol, same dose as thiopentone, is what we will propose. What we aim for is burst suppression. Now there is something else that you can, so this is standard. So you see someone who actually crosses the limit of 5 minutes, we think that he probably is a potential candidate to end up with status. Then you actually have a status which goes on for 30 minutes. You would say that yes, he has an established status. 1 hour, 2 hour, you're saying that we are entering the refractory field, and then we're actually looking at a 24-hour period, or someone who actually has seizures even while on anesthesia, which means that the pentobarbital, and then you probably say that this is a super refractory status. So I'm not going to talk about all the other things. We're talking about the simple status that you would experience in your practice setup, probably up to the level of established status, and then what we do when the patient is transferred to us. So we actually then look at putting them up onto the any of these modalities: midazolam infusion, thiopentone, short duration propofol. In addition to that, we also do something which is oral load of topiramate, oral load of perampanel, and continuous phenobarbital infusion. So this is something that can be aimed and achieved, because what has been seen that when you go on to the refractory status, the moment you start dropping their midazolam levels, or in the continuous infusion, or the thiopentone levels, we end up with having breakthrough seizures, and that is why we use phenobarbital as a continuous infusion of 2 milligram per kg per hour. Now, when we look at thiopentone, we are worried about the cyanide toxin, not and the doses that we use for pediatrics, but in an adult world, you definitely would be having that problem, which means that you should be doing a 2D echo after 48 to 72 hours for someone who is been on a thiopentone infusion. So that also is a limiting factor, and you cannot keep them actually burst suppressed for a long period. So we aim for a 48 to 72 hours period, and then after that try to achieve coming back, going down on the burst suppression. Now the reason is that if you suppress them long enough, you actually create difficulties in terms of the cognitive domain when they recover from this incident episode. So going for longer periods of burst suppression, up to 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, is not advocated. So the minimum burst suppression of 1 to 6 seconds is what is to be aimed for, but it's very difficult to maintain. You are going to tip over to the other side. So trying to aim for a shorter thing is always better. Now this EEG, actually the red line is showing that continuously or so. So the 4 leads on the top are actually the right-sided ones, the 4 in between are the left, then again 4 right, 4 left, and we have the 2 midline ones. So the ones which are in the right red color actually are continuously firing. Epileptic discharges are being seen, and the same are transferred to the opposite side on the left side. So we are seeing a status which is, or electrical activity which is building up, which may be manifested, may not be manifested. So in this setting, it was manifested. So we're seeing, and it was like a focal status which was moving ahead, continuing. And then now with all the things that you have done, now we are seeing periods of break in between these discharges. This is the period that we are now achieving suppression in between the continuous. And this is the actual suppression. Now we are seeing the flat line between these discharges. This is what we aim for, maximum up to 6 seconds, even lesser is good. We just maintain them and hope that we don't end up having super refractory status. So we actually look at using the infusions appropriately: midazolam, thiopentone, propofol, oral loads for topiramate and perampanel, and continuous phenobarb infusions. Once we have failed our 2 doses of benzodiazepines and our first line medication or second line medication, which is either the phenytoin, fosphenytoin, valproate, levetiracetam, phenobarb, lacosamide, 6 different options to choose from. Whichever you choose, appropriate. But then if you're not controlled, better to move them to a higher center where the facility for ventilatory support is there, because they eventually will require ventilatory support if you want to run high on the midazolam infusion. So the second part of the care would probably be done at a higher center. So that is how we would manage. Cause and other things would be there, but this is just a simplistic view what we actually do when we actually encounter a status. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patil sir. That was really nice description about the medicines and how to manage the status epilepticus. So I would like to ask everyone to, if anyone is having any question, they can ask in the chat box.
I have put
Can
one
you
question.
share your video?
I have put one question. What does basal metabolic this investigation workup means, and how do you interpret the results?
Shekhar, can you please unmute your video and join us on the platform? Please.
Yeah, so okay, so what we actually look at, simple metabolic things are primarily we're looking at calcium, sugar, magnesium. So that is what we mean by the basic metabolic workup. So I mean, you can also say that, okay, the extended or expanded newborn screening is also now routinely offered. So maybe that also should be a part of your basic metabolic workup. But simple things that you would do when a child comes to you, sugar, calcium, magnesium, that would be enough for a basic metabolic workup. If you think it's a neonatal case, then maybe doing a expanded NBST, maybe something that you can advocate. But how do you interpret as normal? Well, we look at the ranges and we just say that if it is normal, it's normal, and then move ahead.
Do you consider electrolytes as a metabolic?
Electrolytes, yes.
Yes. Sorry, forgot electrolytes, but yes,
Serum,
that also
serum
would be
electrolytes.
part of the metabolic work.
Neonate, do you look at the pyridoxine levels? So what exactly investigation you recommend for possible pyridoxine dependent?
Okay, so if you're actually looking at a setup where you actually looked at, let us say that you are actually seeing a neonate or probably an early infant, and then you're actually seeing multiple seizure types, and then you actually have done your basic metabolic workup and you find that he still is continuing to throw seizures and I want to add pyridoxine. Well, there is no harm in just giving the pyridoxine. IV pyridoxine is available, single brand, but then if you want to use it as an IV preparation, you have to have a continuous EEG monitoring because you can actually suppress the brain to a dramatic extent. So we don't want to end up having a dramatic burst suppression. So oral load is fine, what we actually advocate. And what you can do is probably do a CSF study and a urine study. And the metabolite that you actually pick up is alpha amino adipic semialdehyde, which is known as AASA. Now, this is something which probably can help us. It does not mean that if the metabolite which is picked up in the urine or the CSF, if there is an abnormal range, that you really are looking at pyridoxine dependent epilepsy, or if you actually you still suspect but the levels are normal, does not necessarily disprove the pyridoxine. So there is a way to check it metabolically, but the results need not be 100% in one direction or the other. So you can probably ask for a genetic test and then you actually look at the aldehyde gene and see whether that gives you the answer. But clinical,
these are
more
equally,
effective.
doing these metabolites are equally costly. So we are spending maybe more than double in metabolites compared to genetics, which is a definitive one. So always better to give a clinical trial. If response well, EEG normalizes, directly go for genetics. What do you say?
I agree. The only thing is that people who actually also have that, so you may probably need to preempt them that you do have scenarios where you are responding to pyridoxine, but your genetics may still be normal. So we have to just make them aware that even though you may probably respond to the medications, we may not be able to prove it genetically. And then it is anyone's guess game that how many months you want to treat, because if it has responded, we did have something which was like pyridoxine dependent epilepsy, and there was something like pyridoxine responsive seizures.
Yeah.
So are we really looking at that? We don't know.
Is there any specific which we are supposed
to? If your baby
to
responds to pyridoxine, how long you continue pyridoxine?
Ideally, lifelong.
Ideally, yes. How many of your patient Mahesh you are given lifelong?
I have still now, I have not come across one also in my clinical practice. In Vadia, we have just one pyridoxine, which is proved one, what I am saying. We have many seen, which responds to pyridoxine. We don't know whether they were positive or no. And later we take off pyridoxine, but patient stays seizure free. There is something what is called as pyridoxine deficiency seizures also, which looks very, or maybe pyridoxine responsive seizures rather, what Shekhar said. That it may be that one, or it may be just we have given clinical, just therapeutic trial. That's all.
So the babies where you start pyridoxine, clinically or practically, what is the recommendation? How long we should give and then see a withdrawal?
If genetics comes positive, lifelong. If genetics comes negative, take off and see take a call.
So you mean to say every of that patient, a neonate where you started pyridoxine, you want to do genetics and prove by that, then again that involves a cost. Can it be practically you give for 3 or 6 months and withdraw and see if he gets seizure and then you go ahead with the genetics? Because I'm sure of all those cases, maybe even not even 5% are really pyridoxine dependency. What's your take, Sir Mahesh, both?
When we can take off pyridoxine, very rightly said, it's very practical to take off pyridoxine, see whether patient relapses. If patient relapses, give again the trial of pyridoxine. If the patient settles, very likely to pyridoxine dependent, go for genetics. If patient is seizure free after taking off pyridoxine, it's well and good, it's not pyridoxine related. I think it's maybe practical approach rather than.
So while ordering a genetic panel, especially when you are working for epilepsy, you have to have some sort of what is going to come abnormal. So are we supposed to tell those geneticists what you're looking at, or just order as a routine?
Epilepsy panel.
Okay, so shall I take it?
Yeah, sang.
Okay, so there is nothing like panel actually. No, it is all designed for Indian setting for us to actually be. So there is nothing like clinical exome sequencing. It is only an Indian lab making. What you only have is whole exome sequencing or whole genome sequencing. So when you actually give them the phenotype, you have to explain to them what your phenotype is. We do not need to make it clear what we are actually expecting them to look at. We just say that we're looking at a drug refractory epilepsy, or we are looking at an epileptic encephalopathy. That is enough. But if we want to ask for panels, I think it is only designed for our purpose. But now with the cost coming down, I think asking for a whole exome sequencing instead of a panel is probably much cheaper, because it is probably now there are certain labs which are doing it even for 18,000. Maybe if you get it through Vadia, even lesser. So asking a whole exome sequencing is probably much more right than asking for a panel.
When you are choosing multiple drugs, like you said, at times you'll end up with 5 or 6 and then you go for genetics and all. When you add second, third, fourth, is there any physiological logic or scientific logic or evidence-based logic, or you just keep on adding with your experience?
So the scientific logic is we always believe on rational polytherapy, which means that if I have 2 arrows, one going in one direction, other going in other direction, and I'm going to cover and hit the target, that is what I would actually believe in. But reality is not so. So you probably have to judge by whatever you are comfortable with, what combinations you are comfortable with, and then probably move ahead. So I cannot tell you that this is the right combination, because this is what I have worked in my set of patients. Maybe the thought process which I had was, so you are right in choosing 1 or 2. The first 2 that you are going to choose, that is probably going to decide. And the first 2 that you are going to choose are the ones which are going to be from the base medications which we have been using for years together, because the efficacy has been proven beyond doubt. The head-to-head trials for the medications in the practical world is actually very less. But we have evidence from the choice of the doctors and what people choose. So if you look at the SANA trial, they are actually the doctors who are making the choice based on their feeling of what the epilepsy is. And the choice for focal epilepsy is actually lamotrigine. Choice for generalized epilepsy is sodium valproate. So even the lamotrigine, we use carbamazepine and other things, but there it is still, so the perception is different. So you can choose whichever you want, but you have to be comfortable in handling that medicine. That is probably more important than the efficacy.
Mahesh, when we start on valparin, what are the chances that patients do come, long-term treatment, do come across carnitine deficiency, and how frequently, or rather than whether one should give carnitine supplementation in such type of long-term valparin therapy?
Usually we have not come across much of the carnitine deficiencies, any weakness or anything. Commonly we look for hepatotoxicity, particularly in infants or the early age group. I practically try to always avoid valproate below 2 years of age at the maximum. But if you are using long term, particularly those in adults, they are many of them, they supplement folate with that, because folate deficiency, what they say, what valproate causes. So in adults particularly, they supplement folate. In pediatrics, we hardly supplement. Other major side effect we hardly come across with valproate, except maybe during initial period we come across tremors, which is quite common. If you start with just 20-30 milligram, which is recommended in the book, practically all of them, they get tremors. So usually start with less than 10 milligram to start with, gradually step up to 20-30 milligram. I think that's the one. Hepatotoxicity hardly you have seen. That's all. Major side effect, I have not. Weight gain and all this hair loss, weight gain, I think you see in n number of patients. So we have many other side effects which we very commonly see. Carnitine deficiency per se, I have not come across. Shekhar?
Carnitine deficiency, I don't supplement carnitine at all. So I actually do not find that. So my argument is that probably it's not there. So I don't supplement carnitine. But yes, as you grow older and you actually come to, because I do also manage that strata where you're adolescent and going into a childbearing age, women or adults. So folate, I agree with that point that we actually supplement. So when that age changes, folate is added.
I have one question. Is video EEG available in India?
It's very freely. It's nothing, madam, video EEG. It's just an EEG what we have as a routine one with the proper video recording going on. So we can correlate the episodes or whatever the clinical episode we have with the ictal EEG. So that is very easily available. I think it's available very well in Vadia for hours. Even for 24 hours we do at Vadia. Routine 8 hours is practically, it's a way, it's not that difficult or something which is very rare, madam.
Is it more for pseudo?
Pseudo?
Is it more for pseudo seizures, to rule out pseudo seizures?
No, basically its main reason to pick up whether the episodes are really epileptiform or non-epileptiform first, and it's very important, rather must, for those where it's a pre-operative workup. So where it's in case of pre-operative, they definitely need a proper video EEG. And second one, to differentiate between what you said, seizure mimics compared to seizures, type of seizures. So video EEG, it's helpful, but I don't know how much it's really helpful in the routine practice.
So I think nobody has.
When your semiology is not clear whether it is focal or generalized, what is your choice?
Valproate.
Get a 3 or a 4-year-old child who was brought to you and you're not sure whether it is focal or generalized. When your age is normal, then what is your choice?
Valproate.
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 Yeah. The same question even I wanted to ask in different way. The one who started with focal and secondary generalization. In that situation, you take it as a focal or you take it as a generalized?
See,
and then what is the choice?
If you starts with valproate and if you have a generalized seizure, it's going to be well controlled. If you have started with the valproate with the focal seizure, it's still going to control. If you have a opposite way, generalized seizure with generalized EEG burst, and if you have Parmazepine, if you have started, it's going to worsen the seizure.
Okay.
So always, it's opposite way is worst one. This way, it's not bad one.
Busy OPD valproate and less OPD, you go into details and try to find out.
Dr.
I
K.
think
काय म्हणला?
No, Dr. K. used to say that
Ah.
if ever you're in doubt is not clear, valproate is the drug of choice. You might laugh.
And we are following them.
I still have following that. Okay.
That's a take home message.
No, but we should now try.
No,
to
but one has to do SGOT,
Yes.
basically liver profile before starting
but
the
that only LFT
liver
should
profile
be
is
done.
must before
Right,
starting
before starting
valproate. Is it true or it is other way?
I think so should do.
Hello, Mahesh.
Dr.
Hello, Mahesh.
Shekhar.
हाँ sir.
Mahesh, weight
Oh, sir.
weight gaining is another side effect of valparin. Na? If we are coming across, should we shift or should we continue or what we should do?
Particularly weight gain, no sir. This is very common. Rather, practically in each and every kid, you have a weight gain with valproate. If it is morbid weight gain, what we are getting, always try. What I try is to see. This is something which you develop over a period in your practice. What I do is I continue with the low dose of valproate, which will not cause weight gain, along with the supplement of other drug, maybe either with levetiracetam, either with clobazam or something. Because valproate anyway is the prime drug. Its efficacy wise, it's an excellent. So even in adolescent, if you get 200 milligram of valproate of weighing some 50-60 kg, that will help. If you take off and start only levetiracetam, there is a high chance of relapse. So I keep just 200 minimal dose of valproate with levetiracetam. Many of them, they get controlled well with no side effect.
Sir, Abha's question is still unanswered. Before starting when we start valproate, whether to do LFT and to keep as a baseline LFT or not.
Usually I don't do baseline LFT. I prefer to after a month, whether it's deteriorating. Second LFTs and second one is platelet count. Sometimes you get thrombocytopenia with valproate. So I start after 2 years. No, before 2 years hardly, unless you have a safer antiepileptics before 2 years of age. So better to prefer that. Rather than doing baseline, I do after a month. If you have borderly high LFT, SGPT particularly, supplement with carnitine if the valproate is must in that case. If it's normalizing, it's well and good. If still it's keeping high, better to take off that.
Mahesh,
One last interesting question. Whether have you encountered the use of Ayurvedic medicine giving rise to seizures?
आता ह्याच्यात सर एक सांगतो नाही दिस हे वन पेशंट मोहिते सरांनी पण पाहिलेलं तो पेशंट बेसिकली that Rolandic epilepsy, proper Rolandic epilepsy, atypical effects.
Ayurvedic वाले.
Huh?
मी नाही Ayurvedic.
But used by because many of the drugs given as brain tonics in Ayurveda and many drugs are used. So whether have you encountered any case related to that giving rise to seizure?
This patient was admitted in status, non-convulsive status, Rolandic वाला proper. तो आला वेल कंट्रोल्ड मध्ये वर्ष दीड वर्ष गायब झाला आणि त्याच्यानंतर जो आला ही वॉज स्वेइंग कंटिन्युअसली स्वेइंग रोलँडिक टू गो इन नॉन कन्व्हल्सिव्ह सीझर स्टेटस व्हेरी इट्स अटिपिकल बेट्स रेअरली वी सी बॅड कंटिन्युअस स्वेइंग त्याचा व्हिडिओ पण आहे, आय विल शेअर विथ मोहिते सर. कंटिन्युअस स्वेइंग होतं. ही रिक्वायर्ड स्टिरॉइड्स, ही प्रेझेंटली ऑफ स्टिरॉइड्स, ऑफ सीझर्स, जस्ट ऑन वन अँटीप्लेप्टिक. 1 वर्ष होमिओपॅथिक मेडिसिन घेत होता मुंबईत आणि चांगल्या माहित नाही आता इथं, पण तो मुंबईत जाऊन तेवढ्यासाठी जाऊन यायचा आणि ही ऍडमिटेड विथ रिअली बॅड सीझर्स and proper simple Rolandic epilepsy.
I have got one practical last question. Sorry, last
I
question.
think we are running out of time. We are...
One question, please.
Me?
Nice.
Mahesh.
Okay.
Hello, Mahesh.
Sir.
If a patient is on a prolonged valparin therapy, when we should go for serum valparin level?
कशाला करायला पाहिजे? Not required anyway unless really indicated. आता कधी इंडिकेटेड आयदर यू हॅव अन इनएडिक्वेट रिस्पॉन्स और यू हॅव अ टॉक्सिसिटी. इनएडिक्वेट रिस्पॉन्स घेतोय तरी सीझर्स येतात, घेतोय डोस वाढवला तरी सीझर्स येतात, तर बघायचं वेदर इट्स रिअली ही इज टेकिंग और नो. सो इन दॅट केस इट्स द ट्रफ लेवल व्हॉट वी डू. पुढच्या डोसच्या अगोदरची जस्ट
Extension of this question, are we supposed to increase the dose in a well-controlled epilepsy as per the weight increases?
नाही, नॉट एट ऑल.
Acha.
Not required.
Because most of the time we see adult prescriptions, what you said, 200 milligram, 300 milligram, or whatever. We always feel ki about 20 kg child is going to receive 200 BD. Then this adult, what is doing at 300 single dose? So, but what you said is right, because they are controlled at a very low level. So one will not increase the dose as per the weight.
Type, it depends upon type of seizure. If you have idiopathic generalized epilepsy, even a minimal 200 milligram
That's what I'm telling you. Yeah.
is suffice for an adult one.
That is the message, right? That is the message.
I have one last question.
One
sorry.
last question. and
Last
then
question,
wind
yeah.
up.
Dr. Mahesh, we practically have been using 5 anti-epileptic drugs in our office practice and in our hospitals. Like we use sodium valproate, we use Gardinal, we use midazolam, we use clobazam, and we use levetiracetam. So what are the clear-cut indications of using these common drugs? Because what the drugs which were mentioned in the lecture, as well as the second line, third line drugs, we have not been using in our office practice and in our at peripheral level. So of these 5 drugs, what are the clear-cut indications for each of them?
I think they all neonates, early infancy, Gardinal or phenobarbital is the best drug to use.
Okay.
Or levetiracetam, which has equal good efficacy. If you have excess drowsiness, sleepiness, maybe levetiracetam is a better efficacy.
Okay.
First. So you have first Gardinal. Second one regarding valproate or oxcarbazepine. If you have focal seizure, it's basically always oxcarbazepine. If you have a generalized one, generalized seizure at this stage are not that common.
Okay.
There are certain seizure, what is called as Douze syndrome, where you have head drop like, or symptomatic epilepsy, remote symptomatic one.
Yes.
Where you have infantile spasms, generalized seizure, head drops commonly. Delayed cell. If you have delayed kids, microcephalic, many of them they have drop attack. And for these drop attack, valproate is the best drug to have.
Okay. Okay.
So commonly, dusra midazolam it's only for emergency management.
Emergency,
So
yes.
the
Right.
oral one.
Right.
The tisra and dusra freesium. This clobazam. Clobazam we use routinely.
Yes.
Clobazam is an excellent add-on drug for complex purpose.
Okay.
For if it's not responding to oxcarbazepine, in even a minimal dose of clobazam will help. Either second clobazam or maybe levetiracetam.
Okay,
first
great.
add-on what I use.
Yes,
I
thank
think
you.
we can't take any more
Hello,
questions,
Mahesh.
sir. It is almost 11 o'clock, sir.
Just a minute, just a few questions. One little question.
Little.
Mahesh.
अबे लिटिल बोला लवकर.
बोला सर आता.
लिटिल लवकर बोला.
अहो लिटिल वेळ झाली सर.
Mahesh,
I think he is.
Hello, Mahesh.
हाँ सर, हो बोला ना सर.
Do you come across a learning disabilities while patient is on Gardinal?
Gardinal, हो सर, definitely Gardinal basically we hardly use Gardinal. आता तुमच्यातलंच किती लोक Gardinal use करतात? Very rarely.
Right.
We are not using Gardinal at all. But learning difficulty, behavioral issues, very marked what we see with clobazam. And second drug is levetiracetam.
Oh.
I think these two drugs to some behavioral issues worsen with levetiracetam very much. And clobazam हे बरा worsening in scholastic performance, stubborn behavior, aggression हे सगळं clobazam मुळे होतं.
Cardinal is only used in CPs now, I think so. Cardinal is preferred
I
only
think we
CPs
must
only.
stop now. It is
Yeah. Thank you, President ma'am.
Sir,
for allowing-
11 o'clock.
Thank you, President ma'am, for allowing me.
little question.
Please.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, the speaker. Hey, wait, Dr. Rajendra. Thank you, Dr. Mahesh Sambhare, Dr. Shekhar Patil for such an excellent presentation. Dr. Moite sir, thank you so much. Dr. Heman Gangulia sir, Dr. Abba, Dr. Wankhede sir, for interaction. It was very lively. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
Vishal and Neha, special thanks because this is first episode going live on Facebook streaming and on YouTube. So they
Let,
have worked hard for
let,
it.
let Neha speak for 1 minute.
Neha, do you want to say anything?
Her experience of doing that. She is there or not?
Yeah, she's
Thank you, ma'am.
there. Yeah. You want to say anything, Neha?
Thank you.
Okay.
Chalo, thank you. Bye.
We wind up now then.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you,
Thank you
Mahesh.
so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shekhar.
Thank you.
Shekhar,
Thank
good
you
night.
very much.
Thank you,
Shekhar,
sir.
bye.
Good night.
Shekhar, good night.
Bodro?
Good night.
Mahesh, bye. All. Bye, 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 bye.